What if I told you the most powerful room in Britain? No, not Buckingham Palace, but the House of Commons just pulled the rug out from under Meghan Markle's entire business empire. That behind oak-paneled doors and parliamentary protocol, a plan was quietly hatched and executed. A plan to do something not even the late Queen dared in her lifetime. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Strip Meghan Markle. Not of fame, not of fortune, but of the one thing that gave her post-royal brand its teeth, the Duchess title. You heard that right. The United Kingdom Parliament, under legal mechanisms no one thought would ever be used, may have just shattered the last link between Meghan Markle and her royal identity. No press release, no palace statement, just action. And now, the Duchess no longer holds the Duchess label. At least, not in any meaningful legal or commercial way. But how did it get this far? Why now, nearly 5 years after Meghan and Harry left the UK in what was meant to be a quiet, clean break? And more importantly, why has Westminster suddenly turned its attention to Meghan's new wellness brand? The same brand that, until weeks ago, was on track to become the next billion-dollar global lifestyle empire? Let's rewind for a second. Because this wasn't just politics. It was personal. It started with a candle. Yes, a candle. Lavender Rose Blend. Retailing at an eye-watering £60 per jar, it was the soft launch of Meghan Markle's latest venture, a high-end wellness brand, infused with royal undertones, draped in minimalist cream packaging, and, here's the kicker, branded subtly, but unmistakably, as by the Duchess. Now imagine being a British MP, sitting in the Parliament's chamber, watching headlines roll in about a woman who stepped down from royal duties, renounced life in the UK, and yet was now shipping royally inspired products into British homes for profit. You see where this is going? There was always tension between the monarchy and the market. Royals don't sell. They serve. Or at least, they used to. But Meghan? She flipped the script. And for a while, it worked. Hollywood embraced her. Corporate America showered her with deals. Netflix, Spotify, book publishers, wellness startups, all lined up to work with the modern Duchess. She didn't need the palace. She had power, press, and an audience. But power without a crown. That was manageable. Profit from a crown without power? That's where Parliament drew the line. And that's when something shifted in Westminster. It started as whispers. An MP here, a journalist there. Then, a letter, anonymous and signed, circulated in Whitehall. A copy reportedly landed on the desk of a high-ranking official in the Department for Business and Trade. It posed a simple, piercing question. Is it legally permissible for a former working royal to commercially exploit a British title for personal financial gain, when they no longer reside in the UK, no longer serve the crown, and no longer answer to the sovereign? A week later, a motion was filed, and that's when the countdown began. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and imagine this. You're Meghan Markle. You've just invested millions into a global rollout. PR campaigns, influencer boxes, signed agreements with major retailers, and a brand identity built meticulously around the Duchess. Then one morning, your team gets a call from London. It's not a tabloid tip-off. It's not a press inquiry. It's a formal government notice. We are reviewing the legal boundaries of courtesy titles used for commercial benefit. Silence, followed by chaos. And it didn't stop there. Because just as Meghan's legal team scrambled to draft responses, the leak happened. Someone inside Parliament, someone bold or reckless, sent classified session notes to the media, excerpts from private debates, redacted memos, and in them, phrases like, diminishing the dignity of the peerage, commercialized title abuse, post-monarchy identity profiteering, and the one that triggered a firestorm online. This House must consider the removal or restriction of courtesy titles for former senior royals who monetize their affiliation to the crown. You could hear the internet explode. Within hours, #NoMoreDuchess was trending in the UK. And then in the US, supporters cried foul. It's misogyny. It's punishment. It's envy. Critics doubled down. She left the royal family. Why is she still profiting from it? But here's what most people didn't see coming. This wasn't just about Meghan. It was about precedent. Because if Meghan's Duchess label was allowed to become a billion-pound brand, what stopped others, estranged royals, disavowed dukes, even fringe family members, from doing the same? A line had to be drawn, and Parliament picked the spot. But that raises the next big question. Who really pushed for it? Because make no mistake, this wasn't some spontaneous debate. It wasn't tabloid-driven. This was planned, strategic, backed by legal scholars and quietly greenlit by figures no one expected to weigh in. Some say it was initiated by a group of Tory MPs aligned with the Crown. Others whisper about Labour backbenchers, tired of royal spectacle masking real issues. And a few, just a few, point fingers at someone closer to the palace. Much closer. You'll want to hear that part. But first, let's talk impact. Within 3 days of the leak, major UK retailers began quietly removing Meghan's products from their online shelves. Some cited compliance uncertainty. Others offered no explanation at all. Her brand's Instagram comments were flooded. Investors reportedly paused payments. And whispers from Meghan's Montecito mansion hinted at emergency Zoom calls with legal firms in London and LA. But the most brutal blow? A letter sent to the office of the Duchess of Sussex from Parliament itself. Signed. Stamped. Formal. The contents haven't been fully disclosed, but insiders claim it opened with a line no one expected. The continued use of the style Duchess of Sussex in commercial contexts is currently under parliamentary review and may be subject to restriction or revocation under the Peerage Act of 1963. Now think about that. A title given by the late Queen, one that defined Meghan's global identity post-Megxit, potentially revoked by a democratic institution. No monarch. No palace staff. Just MPs. And if that doesn't tell you how serious this has gotten, nothing will. Because whether you support Meghan or criticize her, one thing is clear. This wasn't just a branding problem. It was a war over identity, legacy, and power. And no one, especially not Meghan, expected it to come from Parliament. But that's not even the most shocking part. Because just as Meghan began fighting back, calling lawyers, mobilizing allies, and preparing to defend her brand in court, something else dropped. Something that changed the entire tone of the scandal. A detail buried deep in an old contract. A clause that could make or break everything. It's called Appendix M. And it's the one clause Meghan never expected to resurface. But before we get there, you need to understand the strange alliance forming behind the scenes. Because while Meghan may have been blindsided, others were quietly celebrating. And some of them were crowns. What happens when a royal title becomes a brand, and that brand becomes a global empire? For Meghan Markle, it wasn't just a hypothetical. It was the plan. A duchess in name, a mogul in practice. And if all had gone smoothly, she would have sat comfortably at the head of a billion-dollar lifestyle throne by the end of next year. But the part that no one, least of all the UK Parliament, was prepared for? That her branding play wasn't subtle. It was bold, direct, almost defiant. And it came with all the polish of a royal endorsement, without the royal approval. So how did we get here? Let's rewind to the moment it all began, quietly, softly, with one beautifully photographed post. A warm-toned Instagram reel. A white-gloved hand. A golden spoon dipped into honey. A silk robe fluttering as a woman, face obscured, lights a candle labeled in cursive, Serenity by the Duchess. There were no words, no logo, no price tag, no launch date, just ambience, mystery, and that title. But that was the genius of it. The soft launch that whispered exclusivity while shouting aristocracy. And it worked. Within hours, speculation exploded online. Was Meghan Markle finally launching her long-rumored lifestyle brand? Was this the next Goop? The royal answer to Martha Stewart? But most importantly, was she marketing herself as the Duchess to sell products? The answer? Oh yes. Because what followed that teaser was a meticulously choreographed rollout that sent royal commentators, brand analysts, and legal watchdogs into a frenzy. Press kits began landing in influencer inboxes, gold embossed boxes, organic teas, scented candles, luxury bath oils, journals with calligraphy prompts like Grace Under Pressure and Reset Your Royal Energy. The press embargo lifted on a Monday morning. Vogue called it elegant. The New York Times went with defiantly serene. Even Forbes weighed in. Can Meghan Markle build the next billion-dollar wellness brand? And at the very center of it all, subtly yet unmistakably, was a consistent moniker stamped on every product and press release. the Duchess. Not Meghan, not Markle, not Sussex Living or Archwell Wellness. Just the Duchess. Now tell me, what image comes to mind when you hear that? Is it a woman in yoga pants lighting incense? Or a royal in Givenchy at Windsor Castle? Exactly. That was the point. Meghan's brand didn't just sell skincare. It sold a story, a fantasy, a contradiction so potent it bordered on revolutionary. Here was a woman who walked away from the royal family, criticized the institution as outdated and oppressive, yet was now selling a version of royalty back to the public, filtered through self-care mantras and eucalyptus-infused essential oils. And people were buying it. Literally. Within 48 hours of launch, most items sold out. The 90 pounds Balanced by the Duchess soy candle? Gone. The 145 pounds Royal Renewal tea and journal set? Backordered for 6 weeks. But not everyone was sipping from the same golden teacup. Back in Britain, where the very concept of peerage titles still carries constitutional weight, eyebrows began to rise, particularly among those who had remained quiet during Megxit, who believed in letting the Sussexes go their own way. Now, they were watching as the Duchess, a title bestowed by the Crown, became the central marketing tool for a commercial brand, one whose profits would not support public duties, but private wealth. Is that legal? Is it ethical? Or just savvy branding? Here's where things get even messier. Because unbeknownst to Meghan, her team, or the media frenzy gushing over the aesthetics of her wellness line, a tiny committee buried within the UK's bureaucratic machinery was watching closely and with concern. The Subcommittee on Constitutional Oversight, yes, it exists, had already flagged earlier concerns about commercial uses of royal imagery and symbols. But Meghan's brand hit differently. This wasn't a mug with Queen Elizabeth's face sold by a souvenir shop. This was a living, breathing former royal, still styled as a duchess, building a personal brand empire using that title as the main hook. And what many forgot or ignored is that titles like Duchess of Sussex are not just decorative. They are peerage styles recognized under British law. Courtesy titles, yes, but rooted in tradition, tied to service, and historically meant to reflect standing within the UK system. And Meghan? Well, she no longer lived in the UK. She no longer represented the Crown. And she most certainly wasn't approved by any royal or government office to use Duchess for selling 70-pound mood mist and ritual towels. So the subcommittee asked a question, a dangerous one. Are courtesy titles being exploited commercially without constitutional oversight? That one line kicked off a chain reaction that would lead, months later, to that bombshell moment in Parliament. But we're not there yet. Let's stay in Meghan's world for a moment. Because at the time of the launch, everything looked golden. Celebrity endorsements rolled in. A certain former talk show titan reposted a product photo with 3 heart emojis. A famous pop star included the By the Duchess sleep mask in her travel essentials video. A luxury hotel group was reportedly in talks to use Meghan's candles as part of their high-end spa rebrand. Her team was ecstatic. Behind the scenes, insiders say Meghan was more involved than most would believe. Not just as a figurehead, but approving design edits, rewriting website copy, curating scent blends. This wasn't a slap her name on it venture. This was her brainchild, her reinvention, her future. And then came the meeting. It happened at a boutique hotel in Beverly Hills. Meghan, her COO, her legal advisor, and 2 key investors. The topic? UK expansion. Their goal was bold. Establish a European headquarters in London. Yes, London, and open a flagship concept store within 6 months. One investor reportedly said, "It's time for the Duchess to come home." On her terms. And that's when the storm really began brewing. Because within 48 hours of that meeting, an anonymous source leaked the plan to a prominent UK political reporter. And once that article dropped, complete with quotes about returning to the UK market under the Duchess's brand identity, Parliament's patience snapped. They'd let the Oprah interview slide. They'd allowed the Netflix docuseries, even tolerated the memoir. But the Duchess of Sussex returning to London as a brand? That crossed the invisible line. And remember, the palace wasn't orchestrating this. Parliament was. Elected officials, not monarchs, not staffers, politicians. And politicians, unlike monarchs, can act swiftly. Which brings us to the next chapter. The one where secret motions get filed, alliances form across party lines, and someone leaks a document so damning it nearly destroys Meghan's entire business momentum. But before that, let's just sit with the irony. Meghan left the royal family claiming she wanted freedom from titles, from expectations, from protocols. And yet, barely 3 years later, she built a global company with the one thing she once walked away from emblazoned across every box: the title. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when Parliament does what the monarchy won't? That's the question that quietly ignited a firestorm inside Westminster. You see, stripping someone of a royal title isn't exactly routine business in the UK. It's rare, messy, sensitive, and when it involves someone as polarizing, powerful, and press-savvy as Meghan Markle, it's political dynamite. And yet, that's precisely what a group of MPs set in motion. Not on the front pages, not in televised debates, but in private corridors, off-the-record meetings, and confidential memos passed hand to hand. An effort was building. An effort not just to challenge Meghan's use of the Duchess title in her business ventures, but to redefine what a title means in modern Britain. And here's the twist no one expected. It wasn't driven by one party. It wasn't fueled by tabloid outrage. It was bipartisan, strategic, and eerily calm. So how did it start? Well, remember that leaked article about Meghan's planned return to the UK with her wellness brand? The one that said she would re-enter the British market on her terms, with the Duchess brand leading the charge? That article didn't just get social media buzzing. It got phones ringing across Whitehall. Specifically, it landed on the desk of Dame Caroline Holdsworth, a Conservative MP known for her hawkish stance on constitutional integrity. She wasn't one for drama. No flashy speeches. No Twitter battles. Just spreadsheets, law books, and protocol. When she read the article, she didn't sigh. She didn't rage. She acted. Her first call? To Gareth Molyneux, a Labour MP with whom she'd clashed many times in committee, but who shared one core belief: the monarchy should never be used for profit, especially not by those who'd walked away from duty. And that's when the plot began. But this wasn't just two MPs venting over coffee. They started pulling files, parliamentary precedents, historical statutes, everything from the Titles Deprivation Act of 1917, which stripped German-affiliated royals of their British peerages during World War I, to obscure advisory opinions on courtesy title usage. The goal wasn't just outrage. It was legality. Could Parliament, not the palace, intervene if a former royal was using their title for personal commercial gain? Surprisingly, yes. At least in theory. Because while titles like Duchess of Sussex are bestowed by the monarch, Parliament has oversight power through the Peerage Act and constitutional legislation to restrict or review their usage, particularly in the context of public interest and commercial abuse. Still, this was sensitive territory. No one wanted to seem like they were attacking Meghan directly. That would play horribly in the press. Instead, they framed it as a broader issue. And that's when the phrase was born. The Windsor Clause, a proposed amendment, not yet public, aimed at limiting the commercial use of royal titles by any former senior member of the royal family no longer engaged in official duties. It didn't name Meghan, but it didn't have to. Behind closed doors, it was crystal clear who the target was. The Windsor Clause began circulating quietly between MPs, legal advisors, and constitutional scholars. Meetings were held in private rooms. Some attended in person, others by secure video link. The core group grew from 2 to 10, then to over 30. Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, even one independent. It wasn't a rebellion. It was a movement, quiet, calculated, and building momentum like a storm just off the coast. And the justification? Preserving the dignity of the monarchy, preventing the Americanization of royal legacy, protecting the British public from brand manipulation disguised as aristocracy. But for others in the group, there was a different motive. One not spoken aloud, but whispered in hallways, hinted at over whiskey at private clubs. Revenge. For some MPs, Meghan represented more than a constitutional headache. She symbolized a cultural shift they loathed. The rise of celebrity over service. The idea that you could walk away from duty, tell your side of the story on Netflix, monetize your trauma, and then come back with candles and tea, expecting applause. One MP allegedly said, If we don't draw the line here, we never will. What's next? Prince Andrew's Smoothie Shack. Another joked, darkly. The Crown Season 7, the Duchess of Self-Care. But beneath the humor was something sharper. A desire to reclaim control. To remind the public, and Meghan, that titles are not toys. They are not marketing tools. They are not slogans. They are responsibilities. And when you leave the institution, you leave the privileges. Or at least, that was the message this group wanted to send. But here's where it gets fascinating. Because while the group was preparing its legal groundwork, Meghan's brand was accelerating. More press, more influencers, and whispers that the company had just secured a multi-million-pound distributor in Europe. She had no idea the trap was being set. And then, someone broke ranks. A staffer from inside the group, perhaps frustrated, perhaps ambitious, leaked an internal document to a mid-level political reporter. The document included the draft language of the Windsor Clause and an internal memo explicitly referencing a former royal who continues to identify commercially as the Duchess of Sussex. That was all it took. Within hours, the story exploded across digital platforms. MPs plot title crackdown targeting Meghan Markle. Cross-party alliance moves to curb royal brand profiteering. New law could strip Meghan of Duchess title use. The headlines were ruthless. And now it was public. Meghan's team panicked. Her lawyer reportedly called Downing Street directly, though the Prime Minister's office refused to comment. Others say a frantic call was placed to the palace itself, requesting clarification on whether the Duchess title could truly be revoked. But Clarence House remained silent, as did Buckingham Palace. Why? Because this wasn't a royal decision anymore. It was a political one, and the royals wanted no fingerprints on it. Which brings us to one of the most chilling elements of this entire saga. The palace may not have fought it. Some insiders believe they may have even quietly welcomed it. After all, what better way to draw a line in the sand than to let Parliament do what the Crown could not? Strip Meghan without the monarchy getting its hands dirty. No royal decree. No press conference. Just a motion, a vote, and a legal precedent. And here's what made it all the more brutal. Some of the MPs pushing the hardest? They were monarchists, lifelong defenders of the royal family. But they were also modernists. And they knew that allowing Meghan to build a commercial empire on the back of a British peerage set a dangerous example. Titles cannot be trademarks, said one MP in a private email. If we do not intervene now, we risk creating a generation of royals turned influencers. And the public? Divided. Some supported Meghan fiercely. She earned that title. She was gifted it by the Queen. Parliament has no right. Others were more skeptical. If you give up the job, you give up the uniform. Simple. But the truth was, the train had already left the station. The Windsor Clause had the votes. The legal team had the precedent. And behind the scenes, the wheels were turning fast. But just when it seemed like the situation couldn't escalate further, another twist dropped. A new document. Leaked. Explosive. An internal memo from the original Megxit negotiations. And at the very bottom, in red ink, one clause that Meghan's lawyers never wanted to be made public. Appendix M. A buried stipulation about commercial limitations. And it could change everything. But what exactly did Appendix M say? And who leaked it? You're about to find out. Because what came next wasn't just political, it was nuclear. What if the very contract meant to protect Meghan Markle's transition out of the royal family was the one document that came back to haunt her? Buried beneath pages of legal jargon, hidden from the public, tucked quietly inside a sealed royal agreement marked confidential, sovereign approval required for disclosure. It was known simply as Appendix M, and it was never meant to see the light of day. But one morning, without warning, it did. Every now and then, a political scandal begins with a bang. A camera flash, a microphone drop. But this one, it began with a USB drive. No return address, no note. Just a plain brown envelope left at the security desk of a mid-tier Westminster tabloid. Inside it, a collection of scan pages, all marked with the insignia of Buckingham Palace. And at the bottom of one document, scribbled in faint blue pen, was a phrase that set the newsroom on fire. See Appendix M, Commercial Limitations Clause. It took the editors exactly 5 minutes to grasp what they had, and 30 seconds to lock the door to the office. Because what they were holding wasn't just sensitive, it was dynamite. Let's break it down. Appendix M was part of a larger set of exit documents drafted during the height of the Megxit negotiations, when Harry and Meghan were finalizing their departure from official royal duties. The palace, wanting to avoid drama, had agreed to terms that allowed them to retain their titles, but included language designed to discourage them from using those titles in any commercial capacity. The original understanding, according to sources close to the matter, was clear. They could keep the style, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, but only as long as the usage remained non-commercial and respectful of the dignity of the crown. But Appendix M went even further. It allegedly stated, use of peerage or royal titles, including, but not limited to, the styles Duke/Duchess of Sussex, HRH, and Royal, shall not be employed, inferred, or implied in the promotion, advertisement, or sale of commercial goods, services, media, or properties, without express written consent from the sovereign or his designated counsel. Let that sink in. Meghan's entire business, her branding, packaging, website copy, and international licensing agreements, was laced with the term, the Duchess. And if this document was real, then she may have violated the very terms she agreed to when stepping down. Now imagine being Meghan, sitting in Montecito, sipping a turmeric latte, when your assistant barges in holding a phone, eyes wide. The news has hit. Leaked palace memo may doom Meghan's brand. Appendix M, the clause that could end the Duchess wellness empire. Parliament pushes forward after shocking leak. Panic? Of course. But more than that, disbelief. Because this was a clause she and Harry had allegedly fought to keep private. At the time, it was seen as a technicality, a symbolic clause, unlikely to be enforced unless the couple did something outrageous. But to Meghan, selling wellness products inspired by grace and elegance wasn't outrageous. It was empowerment, modern feminism, reinvention, branding brilliance. But to Parliament, it was a direct challenge to the sovereignty of royal identity. And now they had the receipts. So who leaked it? That's the million-pound question. Some believe it was an internal whistleblower, perhaps a palace aide disillusioned by what they saw as hypocrisy. Someone who had access to the Megxit archives and felt the public had a right to know the truth about the exit deal. Others speculate that it came from a Parliament source, a strategic leak, a way to give legal teeth to the Windsor Clause just before debate. And then there's the darker theory that someone close to the royal family, someone still furious over past interviews, past documentaries, past accusations, let it slip on purpose. A message to Meghan. You don't get to rewrite the past. Not this time. No matter who leaked it, the damage was done. Within hours, legal experts were being summoned to TV studios. Constitutional analysts were calling it a game changer. Meghan's PR team issued a swift and vague statement. The Duchess has always acted in good faith with respect to the terms of her transition. Any suggestion otherwise is categorically false. But here's the problem. Faith doesn't hold up in court. Contracts do. And if the palace or Parliament could prove that Meghan used the Duchess title commercially, repeatedly, and with the intent to build a brand identity, then Appendix M gave them a path forward. Not just to restrict her future use, but potentially to strip the title altogether. And yet, Meghan didn't back down. In fact, insiders say that after the initial panic, something in her shifted. She was livid. She believed this was a coordinated hit job. That someone in Britain, whether the press, the Parliament, or the palace, was deliberately trying to destroy her. She reportedly told a friend, "They want me erased. They can't stand that I've done what they never could, build a platform beyond the palace." And in a way, she wasn't wrong. There was something unnerving about the timing. The documents, the leaks, the rapid political motion, the silent palace. Was it a coincidence? Or was Meghan finally seeing the machinery of royal revenge in motion? Still, Appendix M couldn't be ignored. Her lawyers began examining every product, every press release, every piece of packaging. Some were defensible, but others? They were problematic. One internal email, leaked weeks later, revealed that a branding consultant had once pitched the following copy for Meghan's candle line. Inspired by the serenity and dignity of her years as Duchess, this fragrance evokes the calm power of modern royalty. That line never made it to the final packaging, but it had been drafted, discussed, reviewed, and now it was evidence. Even worse, Royal fans and Meghan's critics began crowdsourcing their own audits. Screenshots, brand copy, influencer reels, all with the word Duchess front and center. It was a feeding frenzy, and the sharks had scented blood. But here's the emotional twist. Not everyone in Meghan's orbit wanted to go to war. Harry, reportedly, was shaken by the leak. He remembered those meetings, those pages, that clause. He allegedly advised Meghan to pause the brand expansion. "Let's take a breath," he told her. But she refused. "This is bigger than a title," she said. "This is about control, about narrative." And just like that, Meghan did the one thing Parliament hadn't expected. She launched a counteroffensive, not just through lawyers, but through the media, allies in Hollywood, op-eds, influencers. One podcast host declared, "They're going after Meghan because she dared to leave, dared to succeed, dared to be royal without being obedient." Another said, "This is colonial patriarchy in action. They didn't mind her as a duchess until she made money." The narrative was shifting, fast. Now Parliament wasn't just facing a constitutional debate. It was facing a cultural war, identity politics, race, gender, royalism versus modern feminism. And Meghan? She leaned in, hard. But what she didn't know, what none of her team knew, was that across the pond, in a quiet London office, another storm was forming. Because Parliament wasn't finished. Appendix M was just the beginning. What came next? A live, televised session in the House of Commons, where for the first time, Meghan Markle's name would be read aloud. In Parliament, under parliamentary privilege. And with that, the gloves were officially off. You can always count on Hollywood for a few things: applause when you rise, sympathy when you fall, and complete, deafening silence when things get complicated. That's exactly what Meghan Markle faced. Because after her name was officially spoken in the House of Commons, uttered not by a tabloid, not by a YouTuber, but by an elected member of Parliament, it signaled something far more dangerous than gossip. It signaled legitimacy. Now this wasn't just scandal. This was scrutiny. And when that happened, Hollywood did what it always does when the narrative gets messy. It vanished. Quietly, subtly, strategically. No dramatic announcements. No public statements. Just silence. The kind that echoes louder than words ever could. Let's rewind. For years, Meghan's rise in post-royal Hollywood was meteoric. Oprah, Ellen, Netflix, Spotify. Powerful agents, elite stylists, invites to every top-tier gala. Meghan wasn't just welcomed into Hollywood. She was embraced, elevated, protected. She wasn't just a duchess. She was a symbol of reinvention, of resistance, of rebirth. And for a time, that image was bulletproof. But Hollywood doesn't worship loyalty. It worships momentum. And the moment that momentum stutters, the support vanishes like smoke. Because here's what happened after Parliament dropped the bombshell and Appendix M became public knowledge. People got nervous. Not fans, not TikTok creators, executives. And they started making calls, quiet ones, to lawyers, to PR advisors, to brand consultants. The question they asked, are we exposed? Because Meghan wasn't just a celebrity anymore. She was now entangled in a legal and political storm involving two governments, a centuries-old monarchy, and potentially fraudulent commercial branding practices. And that's when her allies began disappearing. Let's start with the first one. Ava Ellington, media titan, feminist icon, longtime Meghan supporter. She'd written op-eds defending the Duchess, even hosted her at her annual Women's Summit. But now, she was nowhere to be found. Meghan's team allegedly reached out to ask if she'd issue a quick public statement. Nothing aggressive, just a reaffirmation of support. The response? Unfortunately, we're staying neutral at this time. Sending love. Neutral. Neutral is Hollywood's way of saying, we don't want your drama on our hands. Next was Orion Studios, the rumored production partner for Meghan's second Netflix project, an adaptation of a female-led novel Meghan had fallen in love with. Contracts were in early stages. Creative decks had been exchanged. Then suddenly, everything froze. Meetings got postponed. Executives stopped responding. Emails were rerouted to assistants. One assistant allegedly slipped up and said, "We're just waiting to see how things shake out." Shake out? Like this was a minor PR hiccup? No, this wasn't shaking out. This was imploding. And Meghan knew it. Because it wasn't just one studio. One celebrity, one event. It was systemic. Her calendar began to thin. Invitations quietly retracted. One LA-based luxury brand, who had previously featured Meghan as a modern royal muse, suddenly removed her image from an upcoming campaign pitch. When her team inquired, they got the coldest reply in PR history. We're pivoting in a different creative direction. Translation? You're toxic right now. But the deepest cut came from someone much closer. Someone who'd stood by her during the Oprah interview, who'd held her hand through the podcast launches, who'd invited her into their inner circle. Serena. Yes, that's Serena. The two had shared stages, shared press, shared tears. They were more than friends. They were practically sisters in narrative. But even Serena was quiet. Not out of malice, not even out of betrayal, but out of fear. Because Serena had her own brand, her own business interests, investors, contracts. And the moment Meghan's Duchess label came under fire, the risk of being dragged into the fray became very, very real. And in Hollywood, self-preservation comes before sisterhood. Now let's talk numbers. Because Meghan's brand wasn't just celebrity-driven, it was celebrity-dependent. High-profile influencer partnerships had been signed to promote her product line across platforms. Six-figure deals, scheduled content drops, coordinated hashtag campaigns. But after Appendix M leaked, half of them pulled out. One influencer management firm reportedly told Meghan's marketing director, "We can't advise our talent to associate with potential legal gray zones. It's not personal. It's strategic. That's Hollywood code for, you've become too much of a liability." And just when Meghan thought she could count on her inner circle, someone she really didn't expect cut contact. Reese. The two had met at a charity event, hit it off, talked scripts, fashion, wellness. Reese had even considered collaborating on a mindfulness miniseries featuring the Duchess. But now, crickets. A mutual friend allegedly passed on the message. She's laying low. Doesn't want to be seen choosing sides. And in that silence, Meghan realized something brutal. She had built her brand on being the anti-palace. But in Hollywood, image is a palace. And once the bricks start falling, no one sticks around to help rebuild. The most painful moment came when an LA gala, where Meghan had been scheduled to receive a Woman of Influence award, quietly replaced her name with another honoree. No explanation, no apology, just a new name on the flyer, a new face on the carpet. And Meghan? She wasn't just disinvited. She was erased. Now let me ask you, have you ever felt the air leave the room when you enter? Have you ever had people smile through their teeth and pretend they didn't see you coming? That's what Meghan was walking into. Because behind closed doors, the narrative had shifted. Not from admiration to hatred, but from reverence to risk. She was no longer a brand builder. She was a legal landmine. And even those who loved her didn't want to touch that. But here's the contradiction. For years, Meghan was criticized for relying on the monarchy's identity. Now she was being punished for trying to build her own. She couldn't win. And yet, she didn't fold. Even as the phone calls slowed. Even as Hollywood grew colder than a London fog. Even as agents whispered things like, she needs to go away for a while. She refused to disappear. Because to Meghan, this wasn't a scandal. It was a war. Not over titles. Not over candles. But over voice. Power. Autonomy. She'd been exiled once. She wasn't about to let it happen again. But just as she began to rally her team, prepare her next move, and draft a powerful open letter calling out the systemic silencing of women of color in elite spaces, she got a call. Not from LA. Not from New York. From London. It was her business manager. He'd just received a formal inquiry. From Parliament. Requesting documentation of all product sales tied to the brand the Duchess. He sounded shaken. Meghan, they're not just reviewing your title. They're looking into your earnings, your licensing deals, your overseas trademarks. And then he paused, because on his desk was another letter. This one wasn't from Parliament. It was from Amazon UK. And it read, effective immediately, your product listings under the brand name, the Duchess, have been suspended pending review of legal title usage. The biggest retailer in Britain had just pulled the plug, not because they hated Meghan, not because of public outrage, but because Parliament had asked a question, and Amazon wasn't willing to wait for the answer. And with that, Meghan's empire began to crumble. But what came next was even more shocking, because Meghan didn't just lose her products. She lost control of her own name. He never said a word. Not publicly. Not through courtiers. Not even through a carefully worded palace statement. But everyone felt it. The chilling, unmistakable sense that King Charles III had quietly, deliberately, let it happen. The question isn't whether Charles picked up the phone and told Parliament to target Meghan. He didn't have to. He didn't need to lift a finger. All he had to do was nothing. And in the world of royalty, silence is often the loudest decree of all. Because while Parliament was setting legislative traps and Amazon UK was pulling Meghan's products off its marketplace, royal insiders began whispering the unthinkable. The king has no intention of intervening. Let's be clear, the title Duchess of Sussex didn't belong to Meghan personally. It was a gift, bestowed on her wedding day by Queen Elizabeth II herself. A symbol of welcome, of status, of royal inclusion. But titles like these exist at the monarch's pleasure. And for years, even amid growing controversy, Elizabeth II allowed Meghan and Harry to keep theirs. It was her olive branch, her refusal to escalate the war. But Charles? He was a different ruler. Calculated, cold when necessary, and deeply concerned with legacy. And Meghan, to him, had become a threat to that legacy. Let's rewind to the beginning of his reign. The Queen had just passed. The country was in mourning, and the world watched as Charles ascended to the throne. Amid all the ceremonial pomp, one question lingered behind palace gates. What would he do about Harry and Meghan? There were talks, meetings, tense family dinners. Charles, we now know, was torn. On one hand, he was a father. On the other, a king. He wanted unity, stability, but he also wanted control. And Meghan's growing independence, her Netflix specials, her podcast revelations, her increasingly bold business moves, were beginning to make that control impossible. The final straw? Sources close to Clarence House say it wasn't the Oprah interview or even the Netflix documentary. It was Meghan's trademark filing for her wellness brand under the name The Duchess. That single legal move triggered quiet chaos in the palace. Lawyers flagged it immediately. A report was prepared and delivered to Charles. Inside, it detailed the potential damage to royal integrity, the implications for constitutional tradition, and, most chillingly, the idea that if Meghan succeeded, any former royal could do the same. Use their title, build a commercial empire, dismantle the sanctity of peerage from the inside out. Charles didn't respond with fury. He responded with distance. He didn't call Meghan. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't order a counter-lawsuit. Instead, he waited and watched. And when Parliament's cross-party group began circulating the Windsor Clause, Charles gave no resistance. One royal aide allegedly said, if the king had wanted the clause stopped, it would have died before it left committee. His silence was the green light. And that silence became a message. To Meghan, to Harry, to the world. You chose independence. Now you must live with it. This wasn't about bitterness. It was about image, discipline, control. Because Charles had a larger vision. He wanted to streamline the monarchy, trim the excess, present a modern, functional royal family with clear roles, clear responsibilities, and zero commercial entanglements. And Meghan? She represented the opposite of all of that. A duchess who didn't live in the UK, didn't serve the crown, didn't follow the rules, and yet was profiting off the image of royalty like it was a brand name. Charles couldn't allow that to stand. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Because just as the palace was preparing to stay silent and let Parliament carry out the dirty work, someone unexpected stepped in. Camilla. Yes, Queen Consort. The woman once vilified by the public, now pulling more strings behind the scenes than anyone expected. Camilla, according to insiders, had long seen Meghan as a wild card. Unpredictable, uncontrollable, a media-savvy disruptor who didn't play by palace rules. And Camilla understood the media. She knew the tabloids. She knew how narratives worked. And she knew that the worst thing the royals could do was get directly involved. So she didn't. But she did allegedly make a few calls. To whom? No one knows for sure. But days after Camilla was seen lunching with a former press secretary at Claridge's, the British media suddenly went nuclear on Meghan. Editorials, front pages, leaked sources, all painting Meghan's brand as a legal and ethical disaster. One commentator even said, it's not about race. It's not about gender. It's about rules. You don't take the crown's jewelry and sell it on Etsy. That line went viral. Camilla didn't write it. But let's just say, she didn't need to. Now back to Charles. Throughout the escalating drama, he remained completely composed. No public appearances tied to Meghan's fallout. No comments when asked by reporters. No signals of support. But privately, one source claims he told an aide, if she wants to live as a duchess, she should act like one. Sharp, dismissive, royal to the bone. And when Meghan's lawyers attempted to contact the palace through official channels, seeking clarification on Appendix M and requesting a meeting, the response, this is a matter for Parliament. Translation, not our problem anymore. That line sealed it. Because now Meghan wasn't just losing the support of Parliament or the public. She was losing the protection of the palace. And the moment Charles refused to intervene, the political dominoes fell. Retailers dropped her products. Legal reviews intensified. The Windsor Clause gained more support. And in the midst of it all, Meghan sat in Montecito, reportedly telling a friend, they don't want me to win. They want me erased. And maybe she was right. Because for King Charles, this wasn't just about punishing Meghan. It was about preserving monarchy. And nothing, not personal affection, not family ties, not even public perception, was more important than that. But just when Charles thought he'd distanced himself from the chaos, something unexpected happened. A royal aide, a leaked note, and a quiet warning delivered to a journalist. 3 lines, 12 words, and they would ignite a new media firestorm. The note read, Appendix M was no accident. Check the date. Ask about the clause. It didn't make sense, at least not at first. But when the journalist checked the original filing dates and compared them to Meghan's first public branding drafts and noticed one strange signature on the clause's approval page, everything changed because it raised a horrifying possibility. What if Appendix M hadn't just been a precaution? What if it was planted, designed from the start, to trap her? What if the very clause that now threatened to destroy Meghan Markle's business empire was never meant to protect the monarchy, but to ensnare her from the beginning? That's the theory that exploded across both UK and US media in the days following the mysterious leaked note. 3 lines, 12 words, and one devastating question. Appendix M was no accident. Check the date. Ask about the clause. The journalist who received the message, anonymous, encrypted, untraceable, did just that. And what she discovered reopened a debate that many believed had been buried since the day Meghan and Harry fled royal life for the sun-drenched hills of Montecito. Should Meghan still be called the Duchess of Sussex? It's a deceptively simple question, but underneath it, layers of legal complexity, emotional tension, and cultural divide. And now, thanks to the growing storm surrounding her wellness brand, it had become the question at the center of British constitutional crisis and global celebrity commentary. Let's unpack this. First, the timing. When Parliament received Meghan and Harry's formal departure agreement back in 2020. Known as the Sandringham Summit Package, most attention focused on the big-ticket items, the end of public funding, the stepping back from duties, the promise not to use HRH titles publicly. But Appendix M? Buried. Technical. Glazed over by most journalists. Until now. Because when the leaked note suggested something suspicious, the journalist dug deeper and discovered something strange. The approval date of Appendix M came 2 weeks after the main agreement was signed. Even stranger? It was co-signed not just by legal officers from Buckingham Palace, but by a royal legal representative with known ties to Sir Julian Tavers, a former government advisor rumored to have championed stricter title usage laws years earlier. Why does this matter? Because it suggested that the clause wasn't simply there to clarify expectations, it was added later. Quietly, strategically, and possibly without Meghan's full awareness of its future consequences. Was this standard protocol? A harmless formality? Or was it, as some legal analysts now speculate, a contingency clause designed to snap shut if Meghan ever turned her Duchess status into a commercial machine? If true, this wasn't a misstep on Meghan's part. It was a setup. But let's pause here and ask something blunt. Should Meghan Markle, living in California, doing zero royal duties, publicly criticizing the monarchy and profiting from the Duchess brand, still be allowed to use the title at all? That's what Parliament now had to answer. And they weren't the only ones. Because the debate hit UK airwaves like a thunderclap, Piers Morgan led with it. BBC held a televised roundtable. Even American outlets like The View and CNN began asking, is it time to drop the Duchess? In Parliament, things escalated fast. A session was called under urgent debate provisions. MPs gathered under ornate chandeliers and stared each other down across the chamber floor. What followed was less a legal argument and more a cultural reckoning. One MP from Sussex stood up and said, "My constituents are confused. They're told the Duchess doesn't live here, doesn't serve here, doesn't even speak highly of the monarchy. And yet, she's selling products using our county's title like it's a boutique label. What message does that send?" Another MP, ironically, one who supported the monarchy, countered, "Titles like Duchess of Sussex are hereditary, ceremonial, not trademarks. The solution is clarity, not cancellation." But the room was split. Because this wasn't just about Meghan. It was about precedent. If Meghan could continue using Duchess commercially without sanction, what stopped future royals from doing the same? What stopped Princess Beatrice from launching a Princess Pilates brand? Or Lord Frederick Windsor from becoming Lord of the Lattes? And then it happened. A young MP, barely known outside his constituency, stood and delivered a fiery 5-minute speech that lit up social media. He said, "Titles are not fashion accessories. They are part of our constitutional fabric. If we allow former working royals to exploit them for personal enrichment, we turn our monarchy into a marketplace. Today it's candles and tea. Tomorrow it's crown-approved cryptocurrency. Where does it end?" The chamber fell silent. The clip went viral. Even Gen Z TikTokers were stitching it. And with that, the tide began to turn. Public polling, previously mixed, shifted overnight. A full 61% of British respondents now supported either restricting Meghan's use of the title or revoking it entirely. Even moderate commentators said, "If you no longer live here, serve here, or believe in the system, why keep the symbol?" But across the Atlantic, it was a very different story. American media painted the campaign as punitive, misogynistic, petty. Headlines read, "Britain still obsessed with silencing Meghan." When a woman builds her own empire, they send Parliament after her. Duchess of double standards. And for Meghan, the noise was deafening. Because now the title debate wasn't just legal. It was personal. This was the title she was given on her wedding day. The one passed to her by the late Queen. The one printed on invitations, charity boards, foundation letters. And whether she used it to sell products or not, it was part of her identity. But to Britain's lawmakers, it was just that. A courtesy. One that could be courteously removed. And that's exactly what some now wanted. A formal revocation process was drafted. It wouldn't strip Meghan of nobility. That wasn't possible without full legal upheaval. But it could do something far more effective. Bar her from using Duchess of Sussex in any commercial or public-facing context. Imagine that. A duchess in name only. Not on letterheads. Not on product labels. Not on speaker bios or branding decks. Just Meghan Markle. And here's the twist. Some in the royal family supported it. Not publicly. Not officially. But one former palace staffer was overheard telling a journalist, "This has been a long time coming. Meghan weaponized the title. Now the country wants it back." But did Meghan really weaponize it? Or was she simply using the only piece of royal identity they hadn't already stripped from her? That's where the contradiction lies. She was criticized for leaving the royal family. Then criticized for still calling herself Duchess. Then criticized for succeeding because of the title. And now, for possibly losing it. So what does Meghan do? Sources say she was furious when she learned of the formal revocation proposal. That she screamed at one advisor, "They gave it to me. Now they want to act like I stole it." She considered fighting back publicly, filing injunctions, launching a media campaign. But then, just as she prepared to make her next move, she got word that something else was brewing. A second motion, not from Parliament, but from the Privy Council, a historic body, one with the power to advise the monarch on matters of constitutional integrity. And their recommendation? Not just title restriction, title dissolution, not Duchess in name only, but no more Duchess. Period. And for Meghan Markle, that wasn't just a loss of branding. It was the erasure of the last royal link she had left. It happened without warning. No press release, no courtesy call, no polite corporate language about reevaluation or temporary review. Just silence, followed by disappearance. One by one, Meghan's products vanished from Amazon UK's marketplace. The candles? Gone. The essential oil kits? Gone. The self-reflection journals bearing the elegant gold-lettered stamp, the Duchess. Wiped clean. Search results returned blank. Brand pages led to error messages. Affiliate links redirected to empty product listings. It was as if her brand had never existed. And that silence? It roared louder than any tabloid headline. Because this wasn't just a retailer pressing pause. This was the world's largest marketplace in the UK market outright severing ties with a brand that had been, up until days prior, labeled as one of the most anticipated wellness launches of the year. And the reason? One line in a short, sterile email to Meghan's business manager. Pending resolution of a legal and governmental inquiry into title legitimacy and branding compliance, Amazon UK has suspended all commercial activity involving the brand The Duchess. Let that sink in. Amazon didn't. Wait, they didn't need to. Parliament had started moving, and Amazon smelled risk, legal liability, PR fallout. And in the brutal world of global commerce, optics matter more than loyalty, especially when royalty is involved. Now picture Meghan in Montecito waking up to this. Not a headline, not a tweet. An actual, internal brand dashboard showing red banners across every UK-facing SKU. Suspended, disabled, frozen. Her wellness empire, months in the making, millions invested, countless legal reviews, and aesthetic branding, had just been amputated in its most crucial international market. And here's where the emotional spike comes in. This wasn't just a business setback. This was personal humiliation. Meghan had staked everything on her reinvention. She wasn't riding on palace glory. She was rebranding royalty as mindfulness, control, empowerment. Now, she was being digitally scrubbed from one of the most important e-commerce platforms on earth. Her team scrambled, emails fired off, legal letters drafted. Brand strategists held emergency calls. Could they appeal the suspension? Technically, yes. But Amazon UK's legal team had already flagged concerns that cut far deeper than branding. They referenced the Windsor Clause currently under debate in Parliament. They referenced Appendix M. They cited active legal ambiguity. And here's the kicker. They weren't acting alone. According to one senior brand consultant who'd worked with Amazon before, this kind of decision doesn't come lightly. It comes after pressure. Someone high up sounded the alarm. This wasn't a compliance glitch. This was strategic, surgical. And that raises the million-dollar question. Who made the call? Some point to MPs, arguing that informal pressure was applied through quiet channels. Others believe it came from royal-adjacent legal advisors, former palace lawyers who still hold influence in the corporate world. And then there's a third, even more dramatic theory, that Amazon UK's move was influenced by an internal whistleblower, someone who flagged that Meghan's trademark filings had potentially misrepresented the commercial use of a state-granted title. Regardless of who lit the fuse, the explosion had begun. Because Amazon UK's decision didn't happen in a vacuum. Other companies started watching. Retailers, distributors, licensing partners. And once Amazon blinked, they all did. Within 48 hours, 2 luxury wellness boutiques in London quietly removed Meghan's products from their shelves. A skincare collaboration slated for spring 2026 was suddenly postponed indefinitely. One brand Meghan had featured as a partner on her site sent a formal takedown request, asking not to be associated with ongoing title litigation. It was a chain reaction, not because Meghan was guilty, but because no one wanted to be near the blast zone. And that's when something truly surreal happened. Royal watchers, who once mocked Meghan for selling out, now started arguing on her behalf. One commentator, previously critical, tweeted, "I didn't think they'd really do it." But Amazon UK just handed Parliament the win. Meghan's brand is being censored in real time. Another added, how can she defend herself if the institutions move faster than the courts? And just like that, the narrative began shifting again. Not entirely in Meghan's favor, but into something messier, something more dangerous. A culture war. Was this legal overreach? Was Amazon complicit in constitutional suppression? Or was this just what happens when branding runs headfirst into monarchy? But Meghan didn't sit still. She couldn't afford to. Her team launched a public-facing response. A polished statement, delivered via her website and major media outlets. The Duchess is a celebration of empowerment, wellness, and grace. Meghan Markle has always approached her role with respect, and any suggestion that her brand is in violation of prior agreements is both false and politically motivated. We are working with counsel and partners to restore brand operations across all regions. But behind the scenes, it was chaos. Sources close to her team say panic was growing, not just over Amazon, but over precedent. Because if the UK could move this fast, what stopped other countries from following suit? Germany? Canada? Australia?